The morphine had dulled most of Grandfather's pain, but not the fire in his eyes when he grabbed my wrist. His weathered fingers trembled as they pressed into my skin. "Promise me, Jake," he wheezed. "Promise me you'll never go back to the ranch." I leaned closer. "Grandpa, the ranch has been abandoned for 20 years. His grip tightened. "That's exactly why you can't go back. Some things are better left buried, boy. Some secrets should die with the people who made them." The machines hummed around us as I studied his face. Deep lines told stories I'd never heard, and I realized how little I knew about the man who'd raised me. What secrets? What happened at the ranch? But clarity had passed. His eyelids fluttered closed, breathing shallow. As I walked toward the door, his voice followed me. "Don't come back to this ranch, Jake." He died 3 hours later. The funeral was sparse. A few neighbors, the pastor, and me. Afterward, lawyer Mr. Henderson approached with a manila envelope, nervousness evident in his demeanor. "Your grandfather's will, it's unusual." That evening I spread the documents across my kitchen table. Grandfather had left me everything: savings, his truck, and most significantly, the 400-acre ranch that had been in our family since 1892. Attached to the deed was a handwritten note. "This land comes with a burden, Jake. If you choose to accept it, you accept everything that comes with it. The choice is yours, but I pray you'll be wiser than I was." I remembered childhood summers at the ranch before everything changed, before the accidents, before Grandfather moved us to town and never spoke of the place again. The property was worth a fortune now. Developers had been offering ridiculous sums. I could sell, pay off loans, buy a house. But Grandfather's words echoed, "Don't come back to this ranch." I'd never been particularly smart or safe. 3 days later, I drove down the old county road toward the ranch. The October wind carried scents of dying leaves and something wild. The ranch house appeared as I crested the hill. The 2-story farmhouse stood weathered, white paint peeled to gray wood. The wraparound porch sagged, windows boarded with warped plywood. The barn leaned sideways, chicken coop collapsed, fence line wandering like a broken promise. I parked and killed the engine. Absolute silence, no traffic, no neighbors. Just whined through tall grass and a distant hawk's call. Memories flooded back, summer days mending fences, learning to ride Buttercup, catching fireflies. Then darker memories, ranch hands quitting without explanation, Grandfather arguing on the phone about keeping the peace, finding cattle dead in the north pasture. The summer Grandfather moved us to town and never looked back. The front door key was under the 3rd loose porch board, exactly where Grandfather said. The door groaned open. Dust motes danced in afternoon light, floorboards creaked familiar protests. The interior was a museum of abandoned life. Furniture arranged as if family had just stepped out. Grandmother's rocking chair, Grandfather's reading glasses beside an unfinished book. A coffee cup on the kitchen counter, ancient residue marking its bottom. In the parlor, family photographs hung on walls, weathered faces of previous generations. I paused at one I'd never noticed. My great-grandfather with an unrecognized man, both holding rifles over something deliberately scratched from the image. Upstairs, my old bedroom remained untouched. Model airplanes hung from fishing line, comic books stacked on the dresser. The window faced north toward the section Grandfather had warned me to avoid. Looking out at rolling hills and broken fences, I noticed something that caught my breath. About half a mile away stood a single fence post, different from others. While the rest had collapsed or rotted, this one stood straight and solid, as if maintained separately. Something white was wrapped around its base. The walk across the property took longer than remembered. Tall grass hid holes and debris, but as I approached the fence post, my pulse quickened. This post was different. While every other fence piece had succumbed to rot, this stood solid as the day it was planted. The wood looked fresh, recently treated, and the white object was a plastic bag weighted with rocks. Inside was a letter in grandfather's handwriting, dated 6 months ago, long after abandonment. "Jake, if you're reading this, you ignored my warning. I figured you might. You always were too curious, just like your father." The letter explained things my mind rebelled against. Our family had been guardians of something for over a century, something bound to this land through methods that sounded like folklore. Your great-great-grandfather made a deal in 1892, a deal that kept this land prosperous and our family safe, but at a cost. Every generation since has honored that agreement. I tried to break the chain, Jake, but some dogs don't sleep, they just wait. The letter ended with instructions. "Look inside this post. There's a hollow space about 3 feet down. What you find there will explain everything. After you read it, you'll understand why I tried to spare you this burden." I stared at the post. There was a gap near its base, just wide enough for a crowbar. A tool shed was visible about 100 yards away. The tool shed yielded a rusty but functional crowbar. As I worked to open the hidden compartment, I felt watched. Several times I turned to scan the horizon but saw nothing. The hollow space contained documents wrapped in oilcloth, sealed in waterproof containers. I spread papers on the ground, weighing them against October wind. The topmost document was a contract dated 1892, signed by Ezekiel Morrison, my great-great-grandfather. It was with someone named Cornelius Thorne, but the terms were unlike any legal document I'd seen. It spoke of binding agreements with the land itself and maintaining balance between worlds. In exchange for prosperity and protection, the Morrison family agreed to serve as guardians of the threshold and honor ancient customs when called upon. Attached were instructions from each generation. Grandfather's most recent entries chilled my blood. The signs appear every 30 years. Cattle die without cause. Crops fail in perfect circles. Well, water turns red for 3 days. When these happen, the guardian must perform the renewal ceremony or face consequences. I checked dates. The last renewal was 30 years ago, the summer before grandfather moved us to town. The next renewal was due within the month. The wind suddenly died to absolute stillness. In that silence, I heard footsteps approaching through tall grass. When I looked up, I saw nothing. The footsteps stopped directly behind me. I spun around, heart hammering, but faced only wind-bent grass. The footsteps had stopped, but the sensation of being observed intensified. I gathered documents quickly and headed back to the house. Walking across the property, normal prairie sounds gradually returned. Insects, rustling grass, distant hawk cries. But every few steps, I heard those footsteps again, perfectly matched to my pace. When I stopped, they stopped, never saw anything when I turned around. Back at the house, I spread documents under kitchen lights. The contract was just the beginning. The bundle contained generations of records, diary entries, and instructions for the renewal. According to my great-grandfather's journal, the Morrison family came to this land during the 1892 drought, desperate and broke. Previous owner Cornelius Thorne offered impossibly low prices, with conditions. Thorne claimed the land was bound by agreements with forces older than human memory, my great-grandfather wrote. I thought him mad until he showed proof. The well that never runs dry. Crops that flourish when neighboring farms fail. This land provides, but demands payment. The payment was a ceremony every 30 years on Halloween night, a ritual renewing the family's contract with whatever power controlled this place. Miss the renewal and face withdrawal of protection and release of what has been bound. Grandfather's entries described what happened when his father missed renewal in 1934. Crop failures, livestock deaths, strange accidents claiming 2 ranch hands who got too close to the threshold. I performed the ceremony in 1964, grandfather wrote. It saved the ranch, but the cost was higher than anticipated. Some things are better left undisturbed. But the contract wasn't just with one generation, it bound the entire Morrison bloodline. Break the agreement, and consequences would follow the family wherever they went. Outside, sunset crept long shadows across the kitchen floor, like reaching fingers. That night, sleep wouldn't come. Every house creak seemed amplified, and I could have sworn I heard voices murmuring below understanding's threshold. Around 3 a.m., I gave up and returned to documents. By dawn, I'd read everything twice. The ranch sat on what generations called a thin place, where barriers between our world and something else were naturally weak. Cornelius Thorne had been more than a simple rancher. Documents suggested he'd been an occultist who made contact with entities beyond normal experience. Rather than being destroyed, he'd negotiated a mutually beneficial arrangement. The land would remain supernaturally fertile, but only as long as human guardians maintained their bargain. The renewal ceremony reinforced bindings that kept otherworldly forces contained while allowing beneficial influence to flow. Grandfather's final entries revealed the Threshold's location, a cave system on the north end serving as focal point for supernatural activities. The cave mouth is hidden behind oak trees near the old windmill, he'd written. Never go there alone. The entities grow stronger as renewal approaches, and they don't distinguish between friend and foe when hungry. But I'd already decided. I couldn't sell this land to unsuspecting developers, couldn't walk away and leave whatever was bound here to potentially break free. Like it or not, I was a Morrison, and this was my responsibility. The documents included detailed renewal instructions, along with warnings about what could go wrong. The ritual required performance on Halloween night at midnight, with specific offerings and incantations passed down through generations. Miss any detail, and the ceremony would fail. Worse, failed renewal would weaken bindings enough to allow contained entities to escape. I looked at my phone. October 29th. 2 days to prepare for something that would either save or damn me. The next morning, I drove to town for supplies. The ritual required specific items: beeswax candles, sea salt, a silver blade, and various herbs. The most difficult requirement was water drawn from the original well during new moon. Fortunately, the family documents indicated the well behind the house was the one referenced. Moving through town, picking up supplies while trying to act normal, I couldn't shake the feeling I was preparing for something potentially lethal. The rational part insisted this was elaborate nonsense, folklore gone wrong over generations. But documents were too detailed, too consistent across decades for simple delusion, and there were physical realities I couldn't ignore. The maintained fence post 20 years after abandonment, the mysteriously perfect fencing section, the footsteps I'd heard. Back at the ranch, I explored forbidden childhood areas. The old windmill was exactly where Grandfather said, metal blades creaking in afternoon breeze. Behind it, hidden by thick oak trees, I found what I sought. The cave mouth was narrow, barely wide enough for a person, so well concealed I almost missed it. When I pushed aside branches and peered into the opening, I felt a chill unrelated to October air. The cave descended into absolute darkness. From somewhere deep within came breathing sounds, slow, rhythmic, impossibly deep. Standing at the threshold, I felt something brush my mind, not a thought, but a presence evaluating me, measuring my worth and intentions. I backed away quickly, heart racing. Whatever was down there was real and aware of my presence. That evening I practiced the ritual using detailed instructions. The ceremony was complex, involving specific movements, incantations, and precise timing. Any mistake could be catastrophic. As night fell, I stood at the kitchen window looking out at the property now mine to protect. In the distance, the windmill silhouetted against stars, and beyond it, the dark tree line hiding the cave. Tomorrow night, I would either fulfill a century-old family obligation or become the last Morrison to fail. Halloween arrived unseasonably warm. I spent the day making final preparations, reviewing instructions, trying to calm frayed nerves. According to records, entities would become more active as midnight approached. Previous generations reported hearing voices, seeing lights, experiencing mental contact attempts from whatever was imprisoned below. As sunset came, these predictions began materializing. It started with whispers. Preparing ritual items in the kitchen, I heard voices just below understanding, conversations in familiar yet incomprehensible language. When I turned toward sounds, they stopped, but I felt something watching through windows. Around 9, lights appeared on the property. They looked like lanterns moving through tall grass. But when I stepped onto the porch for better looks, they vanished instantly. The pattern repeated every few minutes, lights in peripheral vision disappearing when observed directly. By 10:30, mental contact began. It felt like someone tapping inside my skull, not painful, but insistent. Images flashed through my mind that weren't mine. Glimpses of the ranch in previous decades, faces of Morrison ancestors I'd never seen, scenes of ritual ceremonies performed by men who looked disturbingly like older versions of myself. But mixed with family memories were other images that chilled my blood. Things not quite human, moving through cave systems beneath the property. What happened to people who tried breaking the family contract? Faces twisted with madness, bodies found days later in impossible places with no memory of arrival. At 11:45, I gathered ritual items and headed toward the windmill. The night was absolutely still, as if the world held its breath. Only sounds were footsteps on dry grass and steady windmill creaking. Approaching the oak grove, whispers grew louder, more insistent. I could make out individual voices, some English, others in unrecognized languages. All seemed to call my name, promising desires, warning of fears. 11:58. 2 minutes to midnight. 2 minutes to discover whether a century of family tradition was elaborate madness or what had kept us all safe. At midnight stroke, I began the ceremony. The ritual circle had to be drawn with sea salt at the clearing's exact center behind the windmill, with cave entrance at its northern point. I placed beeswax candles at cardinal directions and lit them with blessed matches. As candles flickered to life, whispers around me grew urgent. The cave entities were definitely aware and displeased. The breathing sound had become a low growl, emanating from earth itself. I began incantations, reading grandfather's careful handwriting by candlelight. Words were Latin mixed with something older, ancient on my tongue. As I spoke, temperature dropped noticeably, and my breath formed visible clouds in suddenly frigid air. By the compact made in 1892, by the blood of Morrison and will of Thorne, I renew the binding that keeps peace between worlds. Cave growling intensified, joined by other sounds, scratching, scraping, voices raised in anger or pain. Candle flames flickered wildly despite still air, and I gripped the silver blade tightly against shaking hands. The ritual required blood, my blood, mixed with well water and poured into earth at the cave entrance. This was the greatest danger moment. Entities would be strongest during blood offering, and previous generations warned about temptation to flee or deviate from prescribed actions. I cut my palm with the silver blade, letting blood drip into the well water bowl. The mixture began glowing with faint phosphorescence that definitely wasn't natural. Approaching the cave entrance, sounds from within grew so loud they seemed to shake the ground. I offer this renewal freely, as guardian of the threshold, keeper of the compact and inheritor of the burden. I poured the mixture into earth at the cave mouth, and everything went silent. The sudden quiet was more terrifying than all previous noise. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then slowly a voice emerged from the depths, not animal growling, but something almost human. Accepted. The compact is renewed. The binding holds. The ceremony concluded with final invocation spoken while walking backward from the cave, never turning my back on the threshold until beyond the oak grove. Performing this requirement, I felt something change in the air, a shift that was part relief, part new responsibility settling onto my shoulders. When I finally turned around at the grove's edge, whispers had stopped completely. Unnatural chill lifted, replaced by normal October cool. Even cave breathing had faded to barely audible levels. But I wasn't alone. Standing near the windmill, illuminated by moonlight, was a figure I recognized from old house photographs. Tall, lean, with weathered features of a man who'd spent his life working land, he could only be Cornelius Thorne, the original owner and architect of the supernatural compact I'd just renewed. "Well done, young Morrison," he said, voice carrying clearly across distance. "I wasn't certain you would honor the agreement. Your grandfather had doubts about your generation's willingness to accept responsibility." I approached cautiously, still carrying ritual implements. Up close, he looked solid and real, though something about his appearance suggested he wasn't entirely present in normal sense. "Are you dead?" He laughed, genuinely warm despite supernatural circumstances. "Dead? Alive? These are human distinctions that become less meaningful when you've spent over a century maintaining agreements with entities existing outside normal time and space. I am what I need to be to fulfill obligations." Thorne explained the full scope of what I'd inherited. The ranch would be prosperous, crops would flourish, livestock thrive, land would provide for my needs. But I'd also monitor entities below, watch for weakening bindings, and perform smaller maintenance rituals throughout each 30-year cycle. Most importantly, you must prepare the next generation. The compact requires continuity. If the Morrison line ends, or if future generations refuse responsibility, the entities will eventually break free. He handed me a key I hadn't seen before, old, ornate, made of silver mixed with something else. "This opens a room you haven't found yet. It contains everything you'll need for smaller rituals and knowledge to train your successor. Use it wisely." Dawn broke clear over the ranch, and for the first time in 20 years, the property felt truly alive. Morning light revealed overnight changes. Grass looked greener, broken fences had somehow mended, and even the old windmill turned more smoothly. Thorne's key opened a door I'd missed during initial exploration, a study hidden behind what appeared to be a bookshelf in the parlor. Inside, I found generations of Morrison records, detailed cave system maps, and instructions for smaller rituals required over the coming decades. But I also found letters from Morrison descendants who'd moved away, reporting strange dreams, unexplained illnesses, and persistent feelings that they needed to return. The compact created bonds that distance couldn't break. Reading these documents, I understood the full weight of what I'd accepted. This wasn't just about 30-year ceremonies, it was about becoming a true guardian, someone who'd spend his life protecting both the world from entities below and entities from a world that wouldn't understand them. But I felt something unexpected: peace. For the first time since grandfather's death, I had clear purpose, a role connecting me to generations of family history and responsibility. The ranch was no longer just inheritance, it was home. Over following weeks, I moved belongings from town and began restoration. Supernatural assistance was real and noticeable. Repairs that should have taken months completed in days. Planted crops grew with impossible speed, and purchased cattle multiplied faster than natural processes could explain. But I was never alone. Sometimes I glimpsed Thorne walking property lines at sunset, occasionally heard previous Morrison guardians offering advice when I worked near the threshold. Entities below remained quiet and contained, but I felt their presence, a constant reminder of accepted responsibility. 6 months after the renewal ceremony, I received a letter from a Denver law firm. A development company had made an offer for the ranch, 10 times what the property should have been worth. The letter was polite but insistent, suggesting that refusing such generosity would be inadvisable for various reasons. I burned the letter in the fireplace and never heard from them again. The ranch prospered beyond imagination. My small cattle operation became legendary for producing the healthiest livestock anyone had seen. Planted crops yielded harvests that defied agricultural science. And slowly, cautiously, I began understanding that I was part of something much larger than myself. As I write this, it's been almost a year since I returned to the property Grandfather warned me never to visit. In 11 months, I'll perform my first Halloween renewal ceremony as official guardian. I've been practicing the ritual, maintaining smaller bindings, and learning from spirits of previous generations who still walk this land. The ranch that was supposed to be cursed has become my sanctuary. The burden that was supposed to destroy me has given me purpose. And the family legacy Grandfather tried to spare me from has become the greatest gift I could have received. Some secrets aren't meant to be buried. Some responsibilities aren't burdens, they're inheritances. And some warnings aren't meant to be heeded. They're meant to be understood, accepted, and transformed into something greater than fear. The Morrison line continues. The compact holds. And the threshold remains guarded by someone who finally understands that some things are worth protecting, even at the cost of a normal life. Thank you for listening to my story of inheritance, responsibility, and the supernatural bonds that tie families to the land they've sworn to protect. The Morrison Ranch may be fictional, but the themes of accepting difficult legacies and finding purpose in unexpected places are as real as the responsibilities we all carry. I hope you enjoyed this journey into family secrets and otherworldly contracts. Please let me know in the comments where you're listening from. I'd love to hear from fellow storytelling enthusiasts around the world. And if you enjoyed this tale, please consider subscribing to the channel for more stories that explore the thin places where our world meets something darker, older, and infinitely more mysterious. Until next time, remember, sometimes the most dangerous inheritance is the one we try to refuse, and sometimes the greatest curse is actually the blessing we never knew we needed. Sweet dreams, and may your own family secrets be easier to bear than mine.